Hey, welcome to the show formerly known as the CloudCast. We're back in production. Been a rigorous 2 weeks moving all of our recording equipment across the country. Dave, how are you holding up?
I'm doing great. I have to say that during our hiatus, we gained followers. We now have 36 Spotify followers. 36. So
Wow.
I mean, it's kind of like rest when you're working out, right? So you pump iron hard for 3 weeks, and then you take a week that's easy, and you make massive gains in the process. That's what's going on. Oh no, Joe's trying to jump back on. Remove.
No.
I can
Okay,
I can
try
hear you
talking,
again.
buddy.
Good.
Okay, we can hear you too.
Wow. All right.
Okay, so we'll try this.
Okay. Sorry.
All right, no, it's all good. So, hey, first question: is it true, Joseph with an F, that you were named after Stalin?
I I was thinking about this. I was going to say longtime listener of your show, first time caller, of course. Um, I feel like I'm in a better position than most to deal with the type of insults and everything that usually proceed from the mouth of the Reber, just because of our personal history. You know, uh, I'm used to it. Let's move on.
I noticed that you didn't deny the claim that you were named after Stalin. Is that silence is concession, Joseph?
Yeah, I plead the
This is the Soviet Union. There is no fifth.
fifth. They
Would
probably
you?
had worse than
Okay, let me.
the Soviet Union.
Would you recount our personal history? I'd love to hear it from your mouth. Tickle my ego.
Yeah. Well, that depends on how much you want me to say, because I was listening to your esteemed podcast a few weeks ago, and you were recalling there was a question about like self or reporting on yourself in news stories, or how newspaper reporters record events from your life. So I didn't know how much you indicated there was an episode during our time in college together that you didn't want recounted. So I wasn't sure if do you want this to go both ways, or
Oh, I don't care. I'm just trying to build up the hype. So one day when I write the book on the events of Concordia St. Paul in 2015, people will just be waiting for it.
that's right. I don't even remember what year I met you, Josh. It was you always reminded everyone that you started college after me at Concordia St. Paul and you graduated before me. So I think that's the most important part of our personal history.
Is that right? I don't seem to recall that, but if you say it, must be true. I mean, you played baseball there for what, like 9 years?
Well, I think I was there about 9 years, but I only played for 3. So
Okay. Okay. So
Joe, where do you serve as a pastor at present?
yeah, at present I am serving Trinity Lutheran Church in Nokomis, Illinois. It's in the Southern Illinois district, but kind of the central part of the state. And just recently accepted a call there just a few weeks ago. We've only been here a few weeks. Previously was in Northwest Minnesota, not too far from where you guys, I guess I should say, were.
So you finally went east, Joe.
I think more south than east, but
Interesting. Okay, well, glad to have you on. This will just show we'll have anybody on, fans of the show.
right, yeah. This demonstrates anything.
Anybody who's competitive. Well, this is great because now we've got national outreach. This is the first time that we've had somebody from Arkansas or Illinois on the show. I mean, we're really broadening our horizons.
Glad to be of service.
Yeah, I mean, it's practically the Lutheran hour, isn't it? We're just all over the place.
Yeah. Hey, so Joe, we're talking about Genesis 22. And are you a typological guy, or are you more of the it just says it, so it's kind of boring, but it's on the page guy?
Yeah. I'm kind of like let's see what the New Testament has to say about this kind of guy. And I don't know about you guys. That's what I see in the New Testament all over the place, and that's why, I mean, one of the reasons, of course, why when you asked if I wanted to come on the show and talk about a chapter of Genesis, and you said you're up through Genesis 21, and here, well, how can you pass up Genesis 22? Because that's all over the place in the New Testament. Um, so yeah, that's certainly what I see in the New Testament, a constant typological reading of the Old Testament. So I think that's inherent to the Bible, because I believe God's the author of the whole thing, right? And there's a reason that the Testaments rhyme with each other, and the New builds on the Old, all coming from the same source.
That's a nice way of putting it, that the testaments rhyme with each other. I like that. I know for a fact that we have some listeners who may be really interested in knowing what exactly a typological reading of Genesis 22 means. What does it mean to read the Old Testament typologically, Joe?
Yeah. Well, I guess you're asking kind of a broad question about in general, but we can use Genesis 22 as sort of a case study, I suppose, for that. Like the whole idea of a type as a typos, right? Sort of a pattern or an imprint. The way that you would take like a stamp, right, in the ancient world, or I mean even today you use an ink stamp or something. There's an imprint that gets pressed into a material that leaves behind sort of an image or an imprint of itself. And I think, and that's what you see in the scriptures, that God, as the author of the thing, has left behind these imprints all throughout the Old Testament, knowing what the history of his son was going to be, knowing what Jesus Christ was going to do in the flesh, that history of Jesus has left imprint on the history of God's people from the very beginning, even from the creation through here in the story of Abraham and beyond.
Could you say that it's almost like a single set of footprints in the sand? That's what the sequence of imprints is?
Yeah, David, you might put it that way. I don't think I would put it that way, but
Oh, okay. All right.
Why do you hate poetry? Okay, so
is that a fair explanation of typology, or how would you put it?
Well, I thought that was rather profound and beautiful about you actually need to start with the New Testament in a sense to understand the Old. So it's like this idea of the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, which has really important theological implications. So before God even creates the world, he knows that he's going to have to send his son to die. So it's not only that he's got redemption in mind, but like the very cost of creation is the death of his son, and he creates the world anyways, which is pretty magnificent.
Yeah, and then there's, I mean, so the import of the types is interesting, because as you described it, you said it almost sounded like a passive thing, which is why footprints, actually, I do kind of like it, is that, wherever you walk, there is this kind of imprint left behind. But at the same time, so inevitably, where God is at work, which is everywhere, you will recognize his work. And that's true in the scriptures. But even more, it's deliberate, so that we would know, right? That we would know that this has been his plan from the outset, that his plan of salvation has been in the works from Genesis 3:15.
Joe, do you think that the canon was set in God's mind before he created the world, or would you have expanded the biblical canon to be a little bit bigger?
Yeah, that is a question that has never crossed my mind. Wow. Yeah, the canon is that's the position.
So,
although I
don't want to talk about the we can. I mean, I thought you were big on that, but it's interesting to think about, if it's created through the Word, you can't separate the written scriptures from the incarnate Word, obviously. So I think God does have to have in mind some kind of biblical canon. But since creation is created through the Word, you have to say, like, in some, this is going to sound bizarre, but that it was created through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so then when you look back at like the Old Testament, so of course you're going to have these footprints because it was created through all of these things that would be written, this typos that you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, and Jesus, when Jesus deals with the scriptures, he clearly does have something distinct and cohesive in mind, right? So the law and the prophets and the Psalms, it's like there is a distinction that's very obvious to him and to his listeners, right? What's not obvious to them until he opens their eyes is that it's about him, but what is obvious is that it's God's word.
Right. Yeah. So I'm a big fan. We talked about the tetramorph early on, but it does seem that God does have in mind a fourfold gospel, at least since Ezekiel.
So what do you say? Speaking of which, what do you say when somebody walks up to you and when one of your parishioners says, "Hey, hadn't you heard that in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus had a relationship with Mary Magdalene?" Or I don't know what it is, but something like that. What do you say in reply?
I'm just impressed that they're reading the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah, I think my first question would be, have you actually read the Gospel of Thomas?
No, but that's irrelevant. I'm an American. I don't have to read something to know whether it's true or not.
Right. Yeah, it is funny, like the way that scholars.
Joe didn't.
I'm sorry.
Well, didn't we read the Gospel of Thomas for church history at college? Wasn't that part of the church history curriculum?
Yeah, I had forgotten that, but now that you mention it, I think that's true. Yeah. I remember the professor highlighting the part of the Gospel of Thomas where what does it say? It's something to the effect of that, like, in the perfection of every, right, on the last day, basically, like, there won't be any women, right? Like, the women get changed into men, and that's when everything is perfected.
Huh.
It's something to that effect. That's not a direct quote.
I'm gonna have to look that up. That's interesting.
So what you're saying is we're not going to accept it as a part of the Bible, but just because it's in the Gospel of Thomas doesn't mean it's wrong.
Thanks for saying.
I think that's what
transgenderism is. There's nothing new under the sun.
I mean, that's for sure. That's somewhere in the Bible.
My favorite illustration for such things is Legos. Because Legos are so great because you can just swap out the bottom half with the top half, and you can just change the head if you want. And if you imagine that people are like Legos, then all of this makes sense. And in the end, why wouldn't eternity be like, well, they're all just the standard yellow Legos, right? Default Legos. But of course, that's not what people aren't Legos.
I don't know. You ever seen the Batman Lego movie?
That's true.
Yeah. No, well, your actual question, David, though, I mean, with the Gospel of Thomas or some of these other Gnostic Gospels, to take it back to Genesis 22 and today's conversation, like the one thing that the Gnostic scriptures, of course, are very uncomfortable with is any sort of dealing with the reality of Jesus' life in the flesh, and especially his crucifixion and the atonement, right? That's not gonna play any part in these Gnostic Gospels. They're pretty much presenting Jesus just as sort of an esoteric teacher. He's a sage, kind of presenting this timeless, disembodied wisdom, perhaps, but it has nothing to do with his actual concrete actions in the flesh. Everything that we confess in the second article of the Creed is basically entirely absent from those narratives, right? So that's how
that's
I
great.
would actually answer the questioner with that kind of a question. They gut their salvation.
So you can. This is what Luther said about why the scriptures, why we characterize them, describe them as God's word, is because they drive Christ, right? They conform to the analogy of faith, and a gospel which doesn't do that is no gospel. I mean, it's just like it's a complete aberration, right?
Yeah. So connecting that to sacrifice of Isaac, it does seem like human sacrifice is foundational for redemption. And so a Gnostic is gonna hate that. I'd be curious to see how they would read this account of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Would it be like, oh, just kidding? Just like in some of the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus' spirit leaves his body as he goes to the cross.
Right. Yeah. And
So
maybe
it's
that's your answer.
just a show.
As big of a fan, I mean, I'm a fan of, like we said, typology or allegory or whatever you want to call it. I don't think that there's a big distinction between those two things. But it can, of course, go off the rails too when it's not grounded in the actual narrative and the words of Scripture and related to the whole story of Scripture. So yeah, I mean, I have no idea how a Gnostic would read that, but you can imagine strange allegory, can't you, of the sacrifice of Isaac or the sacrifice of Isaac, such that Isaac is I don't know, the soul, right, that is spared and gets to fly away, while the ram like represents the flesh or something that it's like that has to be done away with, or I don't know, you could come up with some strange thing like that.
That's pretty good.
I would have been
yeah. He's the perfectly conforming will. and the ram is the beastly animal appetites and passions, right?
David, take a clip of that, and we're going to make a YouTube short of it and give no context.
Perfect.
Maybe we should just kind of walk through this a little bit then with all the typological elements, because there's a lot of things to unpack. Maybe the first would be kind of this broad concept of God testing people versus temptation. So people read James 1 or Catechism, and what do we say? God tempts no one. So I think this distinction is very helpful. Either of you want to make a distinction between testing and tempting?
I think there's an easy distinction, although it's notable to me that the vocabulary is not distinct in Greek, although it is in English. That's interesting. So you have to get context in order to make sense of it. But here's how I've described it: the good teacher tests you in order that you would succeed, right? The bad teacher tempts you in order that you would fail. And we all know the difference between those two kinds of teachers, right?
Yeah. So the testing is actually cheering for you to win,
right?
And then when the devil tempts us, he's manipulative. He actually does want us to fail.
Right. Because, of course, when you succumb to the temptation, he immediately turns around and accuses you. I mean, it's shocking. Isn't it interesting? It's like we are so weak. We listen to that guy, It's like, how many times would you tolerate if I hand you something? If hey, Josh, here, I got you this treat. And then just before you grab it, I pull it away from you. How many times would you let me do that before you smack me upside the head? And yet, we succumb to the devil to continually.
Try it once.
Yeah. You hear that funny noise that somebody's making? Probably Joe.
That's Joe.
Joe, you're making funny noises.
Can you hear the crackly?
Hang on. Let me turn on this echo cancellation. Oh, I can't. I dropped the marker.
Okay. Joe, you're making a lot of noise.
Hey, you fixed it.
Sorry. Yeah, it got worse there for a minute, and now better for me too.
Okay. So God is testing Abraham here. He desires him to succeed, right? And the success is that he would trust God, that he would believe God's words.
Yeah, and maybe there's even a deeper thing where it's trusting the entire arc of the Bible, of the story. So you talked about reading this in light of the New Testament. So, I mean, Hebrews 11, of course, is the most obvious place to go, where Hebrews tells us that Abraham was willing to do it because he knew that God would raise him from the dead, which is fantastic. But it does really make me question, does Abraham kind of have an Eve-like moment here where he thinks, well, this might possibly just be the seed, the son who is going to save the world. So, of course, he's got to die. So maybe that's why he was also willing to do it. Eve says, "Behold, I have begotten Yahweh." Right? Is there any chance that Abraham might think that Isaac is the anointed one?
I think that's a given. I think that that every one of the patriarchs would have thought that about their son, or at least open to the possibility, right? Yeah. Um, but and that's so. But your observation is interesting because it raises the question of whether or not Abraham would have understood that sacrifice is required, and the reason why that human sacrifice is required, and the reason why that's questionable to me is because the disciples don't understand that. They don't. They believe that Jesus is the seed, but they don't think that human sacrifice is required.
Hmm. That's got to be part of the devil, right? Desiring to sift Peter, and obviously at work. I mean, he clouds, and Jesus keeps their eyes closed,
Right.
because who knows what they would have done if they really understood the story. I mean, you kind of get a glimpse of it. Thomas in John 11, when they're going to go raise Lazarus from the dead, says, "Oh, let's go die with you right now too."
Mhm. Why, I'm curious why you say that, Josh, or why you think that, like, if Abraham does think that Isaac is the seed, the Messiah, that it would be necessary for him to suffer. Is it because of the promise of Genesis 3 that he's going to his heel's going to be crushed, or is there more behind it than that? So what are you seeing there?
Probably just based on Hebrews 11. So all the things that Abraham knew by faith. So, I mean, Hebrews 11 says that faith does a crazy amount of things, right? It's conviction, it knows, it sees. And so, and what does Jesus say about Abraham? He saw my day and was glad. And so I wonder if then, like, by faith, Abraham just knows this is how it's gotta be. There's going to be a son, and then so circumcision's already been introduced here. So the idea of shedding the seed's blood, he
Yeah.
already gets that too.
Yeah. Or even just the fact that, I mean, as you said, Hebrews makes it explicit that Abraham is convinced of the resurrection, which, like, if he believes in the resurrection, he has to believe, obviously, that death has to come first, right? But that's the whole way that it's been from the beginning, right? That, like, um, God has always, again, that's typology, right? That's finally revealed in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. That life, um, like, we think of it as if life comes first and then death follows, but it's actually the reverse. That it begins in death and God brings life out of death. Just as the universe begins in nothing and God brings something out of nothing.
I like that, along with your hypothesis, Josh. It fits then with what happens in the Exodus, where God lays claim to all the firstborn sons of Israel, but then also says, "You're not going to sacrifice them. I'm not interested in their blood, so there's going to be a substitute." So the surprise is, here's a God who exists in this economy that we all kind of understand by nature, that a life for a life, right? And the life of an animal is in its blood. So that's intuitive, as a matter of fact. It's intuitive and it's obvious because of retributive justice, right? Who's the code, Hammurabi's code, right? Like, this is baked in, that a life is required for a life. And just as God very so often does, he's like, "Yep, that's what we're doing here. We're doing a life for a life." Except, it's kind of at the last moment, not the life that you think reasonably would be required.
Yeah. What psalm is it? It talks about who could possibly redeem humanity, like who could pay that kind of cost. That's a rough paraphrase, but that's in the Psalter.
Yeah,
right. So I mean, it's already
in exchange for his life, right? Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's always been there that human life is expensive. So you need God to make the sacrifice, which of course is why the incarnation is necessary. But then on the other hand, after God has been sacrificed, then we do have to say that human sacrifice from that point forward, as in, you know what I mean, like literally putting him on the stake, that is very immoral.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you could say it's very much like in the Gospels. Thereby, God declared all human sacrifice unclean, right? Because it would have been an open question. That's actually fair. I mean, and relevant because of Abraham's background. Makes sense. You come out of Babylon, you know, the deities demand sacrifices. The ones that really matter demand human sacrifice. Completely coherent.
Right, just like it's sinful to not have a pork chop dinner.
Yes. I don't know.
That's the inverse equation. So you must no longer sacrifice humans, but you must eat bacon.
I got you. I got you.
Especially if you
Good,
know any
good.
Jews.
Yeah, yeah.
You're gonna get us banned.
You just nuked the algorithm.
Yeah,
It was really working in our favor. We could talk about the wood, the fire, and the knife, which of course, beautiful Christological things going on. Isaac carrying up his own wood, his own cross up the mountain. I think that's pretty obvious once you hear it once. But what's really intriguing to me is the geographical place, Mount Moriah, where this happens, because this is where Jerusalem is going to be built. This is where the temple is, and going before this, this is where Melchizedek was the king.
This is so the parallel episode then in um 2 Samuel is when the angel is bringing the plague because of David's call for the census, right? And it's at this site that the angel stays his hand, and because of David's petition, right? I mean, that's incredible. It's incredible.
That and that language of staying the hand, right?
Yeah, and the presence of the angel. Yeah.
So, so Matthew 1, Jesus is the son of Abraham and David. So there's this really strong connection between those two. And David must have read this story, and then he knew Genesis, and he understood, well, I've got to set up shop at Jerusalem because that's where the Messiah is going to be. That's where he's going to be slayed. That's where Melchizedek is from. That's where Isaac was almost sacrificed. So whatever I do, I know the kingdom's got to be in Jerusalem.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I mean, that's making me think about the richness of Psalm 110, but then also the folly of David in again in 2 Samuel when he remains back in Jerusalem and gets himself into all kinds of trouble, right? So you think about how it's easy to mistake the significance of the place, right, for the kind of thing that needs to take place there, right? It's not just being there, but it's that the sacrifice that avails for all mankind must take place on that hill.
That's a great commentary on Zionism, David.
Yeah.
Careful.
I mean, it really is, right? It's like it's not just about the place. Like the place is important, but it's about the sacrifice and then faith in it.
Well, and I think that the episode with David and Bathsheba so greatly illustrates how quickly you slip into sin, right? It's not merely that idleness is, idle hands are the devil's playground. That's true. But worse is when holy things are handed over to idolatrous purposes or false purposes, right?
How old do you think Isaac is at this point?
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? Because it's like he's just born in chapter 21, right? Right before this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So narratively speaking, these episodes happen back to back. Like he's born, and the next thing that happens is he's going up the mountain with Abraham. But there's actually, I mean, in that way, it reads a lot like where you get the birth narrative of Jesus, and then all of a sudden you're at his baptism, and he's almost 30 years old. It seems like is there any indication exactly? It sure seems like Isaac is at least a grown young man, old enough to carry the wood for the sacrifice at least, and make that kind of a journey.
Yeah, he's got to. Yep, you're right. He's got to be strong enough to carry enough wood for a human sacrifice.
That can't just be a few sticks, right?
I think you could make the claim based on kind of the reverse typology that he has to even be old enough to resist Abraham if he wanted to.
Yeah, I'd have to check if the timeline would work, because we get Sarah's death in the next chapter, but like why not 30?
That could be
I
33.
mean, 33, somewhere in that range. That seems nice.
That would fit, wouldn't it? Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting too? That the even the language that's used of Isaac, it resonates with the language that the Father uses of Jesus at his baptism. You take your son,
Yeah,
only son, whom you love. In English, your beloved son, right? That's the agapetot word from the Gospels. So that would kind of fit too. Right? That is kind of fascinating. We have a birth narrative, and then all of a sudden, this sacrificial narrative for Jesus in the Gospels of his baptism, and he's 32.
Yeah.
So yeah, why not?
I was just going to bring up, that reminds me, one of my favorite Christmas carols is What Child Is This? Because it just puts it right in front of your face, like why Jesus was born was to die. Sorry, David, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. I was just thinking about that. I love it. I love it when you get these kind of layers to things, because of course, if we wanted, so if Isaac is the son, then Abraham is the father, and the father's love for the son is put to the test here, right? And the father's confidence, you could say, is put to the test. But the son is also tested in a way, and that's implicit, right? What's implicit here is the son's testing, which takes place in the Gospels when he's driven into the wilderness and tempted by the devil, right? Yeah. Interesting.
So in Mark, there's no word spoken in the temptation narrative. So in Matthew and Luke, we get the exchange, right? There's the three temptations, but in Mark, there's no words, and it's really reminiscent of this, because Isaac doesn't say anything. He's like a lamb led to the slaughter.
So that's great though, because you know how this goes. That like you ever have those moments where the conversation stops. Okay, so he says, "Behold the fire and the wood," and Abraham says, "God will provide for himself the lamb." And then what's happening next is Isaac is doubtlessly having an ongoing conversation in his own head about everything that's following. Like Dad said, we're done talking about this, and you know how that goes, right? That's like you're working it over in your head, which is where the temptation would definitely come in, right?
Yeah. Yes, it's like this one episode in the life of Isaac is really paradigmatic of the entire 3 years or however many years of Jesus' earthly ministry, right? That's the whole thing from baptism on, especially. That's the whole temptation, and it's a question of his sonship too. Does the Father actually love you, right? That's
Right.
how the devil tempts Jesus. Hey, you've been announced as the Father's beloved son. Is he really going to let you suffer like this? And then all the way through, that's like every step of his way as he sets his face to Jerusalem, and he knows where he's going, but every step of the way, that's the temptation for Jesus to deny his sonship and the Father's love for him.
Yeah, that's so great. I hadn't really thought about this before, but we have Abraham's faith described in that way, believing that God would raise Isaac from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he received him back. But you're Isaac, and what do you know? I mean, you know the promise: through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed, right? You know that you have Genesis 3:15 in the background, right? The serpent's head will be crushed through this seed. So you know that, and you're looking up at the knife. and so it requires also that Isaac believe that even if he were to die, he would be raised from the dead, which is what Jesus believes on the cross, right?
Yeah. That's a striking thing. The Hebrews 11 passage, of course, is like the most obvious or straightforward when it comes to Abraham and his faith, especially in the resurrection. But I start to notice it in other places too, with the way that Abraham is described also in the book of Romans, especially. I think it's Romans 10, where Abraham figures all throughout Romans, and he's always an image of faith, right? Abraham believed God, counted it to him as righteousness. And we tend, like, I don't know, I think with my Lutheran upbringing, and I'm not saying it's a bad instinct, but our instinct is to think like, all right, who's the object of our faith, right? We always say it's Jesus, right? We believe in Jesus. But in Romans, Paul is very specific that Abraham's faith is not actually in Jesus, it's Jesus from the dead, right? That's the way that Paul puts it later on in Romans, especially. So he's always a resurrection figure, and there he brings up the rest of Abraham's life fits into that too. That Isaac was born from Abraham's as good as dead body and Sarah's dead womb, right? So like the whole life of Abraham up to this point has always been a figure of resurrection, and now this is the most obvious instance of that. But that's what his faith is in, according to Paul. It's in the Father who raises the dead.
And I mean, the connection between faith and resurrection there is actually linear, because if he doesn't trust, he doesn't hand over his son, and so therefore there can be no resurrection because he denies the death that needs to come first, right? It's only if he believes in the resurrection that he's willing to hand over his son unto death. Otherwise, there's not going to be any resurrection.
And then what's even more fun is if you throw James 2 into the mix, and which cites Genesis 15, but then it also says that you see that faith was active along with works, and faith completed by his works. And Abraham was justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar. There is kind of a sense here where like God is vindicated in this account too, don't you think? Because God justifies Abraham back in chapter 15, which is before circumcision in chapter 17, and it's obviously before the sacrifice. So God is vindicated in justifying Abraham because of this account. I don't want to run too far with that.
Yeah, you and your intuitive fide again here. Right?
No, I don't. I would never use that phrase. First of all, because Latin is repulsive. But second, it's like, I mean, this is the question: is God justified in doing what he does? I mean, that's what theodicy means.
This is that's the book of Job too, isn't it? Right? Satan raises that very question: are you justified in being so kind to Job, seeing as he only loves you because you're kind to him? And God's like, well, no, I am actually.
That's right. Yeah, and of course, God is continually justified throughout all of human history. Now, Luther's got a great turn of phrase: is like, we want to judge God so much, why don't we turn it around and let him start judging us?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great description of what's going on here with Abraham, because every ounce of human reason rebels against what's taking place, which is why I mean, I've often thought you haven't actually preached this text unless you've made people really squirm in their seats, because like everybody instinctively saying, no, God never God wasn't actually asking him, no, he didn't actually have to, and this really becomes clear for me, not in the instance of like, obviously not in the instance of human sacrifice, but when you are, as a pastor, counseling somebody and describing to them how they must give something up that they that they love, and they can't bear it. It's just like it's too much. They can't. Every bit of reason in their bones says, no, that's the wrong thing to do here. It can't possibly be true that God's word says that, or God can't possibly mean that, or it doesn't apply in these circumstances. And that's what I mean. Abraham's capacity to walk contrary to his reason here is incredible. Now, that's what faith is capable of, right? That's what faith does.
Have you read Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard?
A long time ago.
Because that work is essentially kind of a loose commentary on the sacrifice of Isaac. I mean, this text opens itself up to this. What's Abraham's psychology? And I mean, you can only imagine the torment of this. The problem I see with that work is that's all true, but if you miss all the Christological stuff, then you've missed it entirely as well. But there is something to be said, of course, about being told this absurd thing to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, is there a connection there in that the impossibility of the command is proportional to the impossibility of the gift that's given, right? The Christology is equally confounding. That God would give up his son is even more confounding than that God would ask you to sacrifice your son.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was nice. You guys, you think that the ram caught in the thicket is a picture of Jesus wearing the crown of thorns? So going back to Genesis 3 with the thorns and thistles being a symbol of sin. I
I
mean, it's
like that.
obvious, but
Yeah, I was wanted to ask you guys what you thought of that too, because it is an interesting. It's very easy um, to see Isaac as a Christological figure, right? He's the son. He carries the wood for the sacrifice. He's willing unto death. All of that. But then, like, of course, the problem is if he's going to be the Christological figure, he doesn't actually end up getting sacrificed. And then what do you do with the ram? And that's I think I thought has been um, I mean he's both, right? That Jesus, we don't have to limit it to one or the other. That Jesus, in the same way that he kind of fulfills, he's fulfilling all of the Old Testament in the same way that he fulfills all the different sacrifices of the Levitical priesthood. He can be an atonement sacrifice and a guilt offering and a sin offering and a Thanksgiving, Jesus can fulfill all of those at the same time. It's all wrapped up in him. In the same way, like both Isaac and the ram are intended to point us to Jesus, just different aspects of his redeeming work.
so you're saying he could be the good shepherd and the lamb and the door all
Yeah,
at the same time?
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, the difference is like there's something missing from the story because we've talked about human sacrifice. Because what ends up happening is eventually the son does have to be sacrificed.
yeah. That so I what I noticed just kind of reading the chapter before we started here too. There is that turn of phrase um, when God provides the ram, and what does it say there in 13? Abraham went and took the ram and as a burnt offering instead of his son. And I think that language of instead of is significant. That it's not just like, oh, I didn't have to offer my son, now I get to offer this ram instead. But it's actually it's more of that sense of like in the stead of in the way that we kind of use that language in the liturgy, right? In the stead and by the command of Christ. That it's actually a representative figure, or it stands in for the ram. I don't know if I'm explaining that. It's not like one or the other, but this ram actually is somehow kind of representative of Isaac. And I think that plays in. I think that holds true throughout all the Old Testament sacrifices too. That yeah, so you're not having human sacrifice, but all these animals are intended to be, or the Israelites would have understood them as being in their place or representative sacrifices. But like they were actually supposed to be the ones on that altar, right? Coming up instead of them.
Yeah, it makes me think of the words of institution, right? Which gets articulated very often as the body and blood of Jesus for you, right? Which sounds to us
Mm.
or to that to the hearer as like you're giving it to me. This is a gift for you, but it's hyper homon. It's given on your behalf in your stead. The body and blood of Jesus as instead of your body and blood. That's what's given to you.
Well, that's the same thing in Romans 8, right? If God is for us, well, it's hyper there. So if God is in our place, right? Same thing. And then Joe, as you were talking, I was thinking about Genesis 3, on the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. And you could take that figuratively because, original sin is death. But there's also the sense in which that punishment is taken away because of the slaughter of the animals where you get the animal skins from. So like that idea is baked in from the very beginning.
Yeah, vicariousness is a part of God's economy, right?
Yeah. I am really jazzed up about this genealogy at the end of the chapter.
Of course you are.
This, I mean, there is something incredible about this. First time you read this, you go from the most exciting story in the entire Bible to a genealogy of obscure names that you've got Uz and Buz.
Buzz and Buzz.
But I think this is this is really theologically profound where this is placed. So first of all, Rebecca is mentioned in the genealogy, verse 23. And this idea is from the very beginning. Adam has got to give up something in order to get Eve. And so very Ephesians 5, men sacrifice yourselves. In order to get the bride, you do have to be willing to die. And so Isaac now has metaphorically died. And what does Hebrews say? Figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So we're actually kind of meant to read Isaac as dying in a way. And now since he has died, he's ready to get married.
That's good. That's good. I thought you were gonna tell me how this connects, but I thought you were going to comment on how, like in previous genealogies, you have this contrast between the sons of man and the sons of God, right? Here he has an eightfold, right? Is it these 8 Milcah, Bod, and Ahar, and then he's got another 4 with the concubine.
So that's
12.
Yeah, that's perfect. So it's 12 against 1.
Right.
And who looks better? Obviously the 12. Now what's fantastic is when you get to, is it chapter 35, where you get the 12 tribes listed at the end of the chapter there. So now Israel now has 12, which sounds great. So it's like, okay, now we've taken the place of this genealogy here. We're up to 12 tribes, but then Esau's genealogy is listed next. And that's an entire chapter of chiefs and kings. And it's like the wrong side of the equation is always growing at an exponential rate.
That's great. It makes me think of the mathematics in where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. Except it's under contraries, right? It's like it's veiled.
Yeah, so this is really inspiring, isn't it? If you've only got 2 or 3 people in your congregation, it's like, well, do we take it like wherever 2 or 3 are gathered? Like that's enough. I'd rather have Isaac. I'd rather have Christ. I'd rather have just one than 8 or 12 uncircumcised ones who aren't going to be faithful.
Yeah. Well, and occasionally you do get one of them from the bad guys. I mean, Rebecca comes over and it's like, that's really nice. That's sweet.
Yeah.
Don't you get that feeling when like say somebody a new member comes along, you do get that impression, that sense of it is like, this is just one person, but that never feels like this is just one person. This is huge, right?
Well, yeah. What parable of the lost sheep, right? The angels throw a party in heaven.
Yeah,
over one sinner who repents, and it's just over one, even though you got 99. Yeah, you're right. So there is also baked in this idea, even though this is the wicked line. Still, in a sense, salvation is universal, not universalistic. You gotta believe, but I think so. You got Uz. That's where Job is from, and I don't know if Job falls under here or if he's the Job Ob in chapter 36, being of the sons of Edom. But you've got it all the time, like with Rahab, prostitute in land of Canaan. She's mentioned in Hebrews 11.
I was just thinking about how Rebecca's actually the mother of all of them, right? Because it's Rahab and Ruth, and Rebecca doesn't get mentioned as the outsider, but she really is here. It's great.
Yeah, she's the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. Joe, welcome back.
Yeah, I'm really bummed I missed all your fascinating insights on the genealogy. I'll have to go back and listen to what you said.
We're gonna use some AI to fill the silence with whatever it thinks you might have contributed to the conversation.
It'll probably be better than whatever I would have actually said.
Joe, I've got 7 minutes left, and I told you we'd talk about this, so I do want to get your take, and this does connect with Genesis 22, with sacrifices actually having to happen. So, you wanna tell me what radical Lutheranism is?
Yeah, radical Lutheranism. I give you my sort of understanding of it, at least. It is an actual term, right? That was
Yeah, so Gerhard Forde writes a essay called Radical Lutheranism. So it is a real term. Yep.
Yeah, so it's not just like an ad hominem sort of um, to be thrown around, but like they're actually kind of flying under that banner. And the basic sense, there's a lot of different aspects to someone like Forde. I know we had to read at least one of his books in seminary. You get a taste of it there. The key, I guess, the center of this sort of radical theology is the idea that God can simply just forgive sin, sort of ex nihilo, right? Just willy
Fiat.
nilly, by fiat, right? Exactly, without the need for an actual sacrifice or atonement to be made. That just by decision of His will, just by speaking His word. Um, and so the sacrifice of Jesus then, or Jesus' death on the cross, gets reduced to simply being like a demonstration of how much God loves you. It doesn't actually affect anything. It doesn't actually deal with sin. It's certainly not. The radical Lutherans following Forde are very very suspicious of any sort of language of payment, right? The payment of debt, as if God could be sort of paid off by the sacrifice. Um, so that's I mean, there's other aspects of it too, denial of the third use of the law, different things like that. But I think that's the center of it is this sort of just rejection of the need for sacrifice to be made, or for an actual payment for sin to be made.
And those two are connected because the cross shows that God is morally serious, right? So there actually is a moral way to live, and Jesus fulfills that. And if you deny that that was God's will, because Forde's take on it is we killed him because he came forgiving sins.
Right. Yeah.
So the one legitimate question that I think if you wanted to be charitable, that they are attempting to answer is, how do you deal with the fact that on the one hand you say, in order for God to be favorably disposed towards humanity, that His wrath must be propitiated, and at the same time He sends His Son before His wrath is propitiated, right? So something antecedent to the sacrifice inclines God to send the sacrifice. You know what I mean, right? So that sounds then like there's something apart from the sacrifice that makes God love humanity, that which is true. But that also their conclusion then is that makes the sacrifice obsolete, right?
No, yeah. Right. Yeah. There's that really interesting passage in Romans 3, or I was thinking about it, Josh, when you were talking earlier um, about like God being justified, right? Or having to like vindicate himself. And that language is actually used in Romans 3. Um, like the question is put forward, like, is God righteous, right? Is God righteous in that, and the specific question is, because he passed over former sins. So how is God going to be like, was he just ignoring all those sins? Or I mean, I think that is kind of the radical Lutheran question, right? Like, were all these sins of countless people throughout all the generations before Jesus came, did God just kind of overlook those? Um, and then, but then Paul gives the answer in Romans, like, no, he didn't just overlook them, and it's actually the putting forward of Jesus and his propitiation, as the mercy seat is his language, by his blood, right? And that's what Paul says is, now this is it's sort of the public demonstration that God is righteous, that he didn't just pass over those former sins, but they were overlooked because of the reality of this sacrifice that he knew was going to happen, even though it hadn't happened in time yet, right?
And I think that's the key, is that God kind of he has to condescend to do things in time, which happen
Yeah.
eternally, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So watching Marvel movies and time travel actually does aid my understanding of the Bible.
Hey, this has been great. Thanks, Joe. You should be a repeat guest, huh? What do you say?
That'd be fun. Yeah. Then we'd have to find one more chapter of the Bible that I've read before, though. So
Well, you let us know.
thanks, guys. Sorry for the audio visual problem.
Things for our viewers to look forward to real quick. One is we got another listener question to take up next time, which is awesome. We also, I should just, for those who are tracking statistics, we now have 36 Spotify followers. And also, I haven't told Josh about this yet, although I hinted at it in a conversation with him otherwise. I've got a game. Next time, I'm going to play a clip of a sermon for Josh, and he's going to identify or attempt to identify which confession or lack of confession this sermon belongs to. That's gonna be a fun game. Yeah, we'll get you on for that too sometime, Joe. We can have a competition.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, that'd be super fun.
And I can't wait. This is an exciting new chapter in the show formerly known as the CloudCast.
All right, I'm hitting stop.